The storm was supposed to bury everything. Snow howled through the night, swallowing roads, fences, even the sound of voices. Daniel pushed forward, blind in the whiteout, heart sinking with every step. Somewhere in the storm a child had vanished, and hope was fading by the hour. Then it came, sharp, desperate, unrelenting. Shadow's bark. Daniel turned, followed the sound, and when the snow cleared, the dog was there, standing over the child who should have been lost, but wasn't. The blizzard had been raging for 12 straight hours, the kind of storm that made even seasoned rescue teams hesitate. Miller's Creek was buried in snowdrifts taller than cars, roofs sagged under ice, and the world outside had turned into a blank canvas of white that erased landmarks, fences, even the road itself. Daniel's boots sank to his knees with every step, snow stinging his face like needles. He had fought through sandstorms overseas, but snow was different. It was quiet, deceptive, smothering everything, even sound. Every time the wind shifted, it roared like a freight train and then fell back into silence, leaving only the crunch of his own boots and the steady puff of Shadow's breath beside him. Shadow wasn't just walking, he was leading. The German shepherd's body caught through the drifts like a plow, his black fur frosted white, his ears pinned forward into the wind. Every few yards he stopped, nose high, drawing in scents the storm tried to bury. Then he'd bark once, short and sharp, urging Daniel forward. Behind them, the town had already given up. Search parties had gone out at dawn, but by evening most had returned, defeated by the storm's fury. Myra's voice had been the last, raw, desperate, pleading with Daniel at the firehouse door. "She's only 7. Emily wouldn't last the night out there. Please, if anyone can find her, it's you and Shadow." So here he was, trudging into a storm that felt alive, hunting for the faintest trace of a child swallowed by snow. His radio crackled useless static. Even the GPS was blind, signals smothered under the storm. Out here it was just instinct, training, and a dog's nose against nature's cruelty. Daniel's breath came ragged, frost clinging to his beard. He forced himself to keep a rhythm, step, step, scan. His flashlight beam stretched only 10 feet before being shredded by the blizzard, a useless ribbon of yellow swallowed in the white. Shadow barked again, this time different. Urgent. He bounded left, paws kicking powder into the air, head low to the snow. Daniel followed, heart slamming. The dog stopped suddenly, body rigid, tail straight like a spear. He lowered his head, sniffed, then began to dig. Snow flew in sprays as his paws churned. Then came the sound, a muffled cry, faint, swallowed but unmistakable. Daniel's chest froze. "Emily," he shouted into the storm, but his words vanished like sparks in the wind. Shadow barked again, frantic now, each sound like a flare in the darkness. Daniel dropped to his knees, shoving snow aside with his gloved hands until his fingers hit something softer than ice, fabric. His breath caught. A tiny sleeve. "Hold on," he whispered, though the wind stole it from his lips. "We've got you." He dug harder, Shadow pressing against him, the dog's nose burrowing beside his hands until they uncovered a small face, pale against the snow, lips blue but still moving with shallow breaths. Emily's eyes flickered open, dazed, unfocused, but alive. Daniel scooped her up, pressing her against his chest, wrapping his coat around her small frame. She was ice, every muscle limp, but when Shadow licked her cheek, her eyes fluttered and a whimper slipped from her throat. Alive. Against everything, alive. Daniel's throat tightened. He looked at the shepherd, snow plastered to his muzzle, chest heaving, eyes blazing with fire. "You found her," he said. Shadow barked once, a sound that caught through the storm like triumph. But the blizzard wasn't done yet. The wind rose again, shrieking across the white expanse. Getting her out alive would be harder than finding her. And now, burdened with her weight, every step forward would test them all over again. Daniel tightened his hold on Emily, pressed his forehead briefly to Shadow's. All right, boy. Now we bring her home. The first rush of relief at finding Emily alive vanished as quickly as it came, swallowed by the roar of the blizzard around them. Daniel knew the truth: discovery was only step one. Survival depended on making it back through miles of white hell, carrying a child who could barely breathe, in conditions that killed grown men. He adjusted his grip, tucking Emily against his chest beneath his parka, wrapping every layer he had around her shivering frame. Her body was frighteningly cold, limp, heavy, with only the faintest tremor of life stirring in her. She mumbled something he couldn't hear, her words whisked away by the storm, but he felt the vibration against his chest. A sound. Proof she still had strength to fight. Shadow barked once, circling close, pressing against Daniel's legs like a living brace against the wind. The shepherd's eyes burned through the swirling snow, his nose twitching as he recalibrated their path. Dogs didn't get lost the way men did, they carried invisible maps in their bones, in their scent. Daniel trusted that more than any compass now. He stole a glance over his shoulder, but there was nothing, just the shifting wall of white, as though the world behind them had already been erased. It was disorienting, dangerous. He forced himself not to think about it. The only direction that mattered was forward. The snow resisted every step. With Emily in his arms, his weight sank deeper, boots plunging thigh-deep with each stride. His breath came ragged, sweat prickling under his layers despite the freezing cold. He kept his eyes on Shadow's silhouette ahead, dark against the storm, tail stiff, pausing every few feet to check that Daniel followed. A memory pushed through the haze: another night, another storm, but in a desert halfway across the world. His squad pinned down, radio silence, vision cut to nothing in a sandstorm that howled like a beast. Back then, Shadow had found the way out too. Not by maps, not by orders, but by instinct. The dog had led them through walls of dust to safety. And now, once again, Daniel's life, and someone else's, hung on that same instinct. Emily stirred weakly against him. Her lips brushed his collarbone as she whispered, "Cold," the word cut through the storm like a knife. He pulled her tighter, his jaw clenching. "I know, sweetheart. Stay awake for me. Just stay awake." He forced his body forward in rhythm with his words. "Step. Step. Don't stop." He knew if he allowed himself to rest, even for a second, the storm would tempt him to sink down into the snow. People froze to death that way, not because the storm beat them in one blow, but because it lulled them into stillness. He couldn't afford stillness. Shadow barked again, short, sharp. He'd found something. Daniel followed, boots screaming in protest as he dragged himself through another drift. The dog was digging, paws churning at a mound half buried in snow. Not a person this time, but a sign. A broken fence post, wood splintered, barbed wire twisted in the wind. Landmarks. Proof they weren't wandering blind. Daniel's chest surged with grim relief. "Good boy, Shadow. Keep us on track." He reached down, letting the dog feel his gloved hand against his shoulder harness. That small touch steadied him more than the fence itself. The wind shifted again, a howl rising to a scream. Snow whipped sideways, stinging exposed skin. Daniel ducked his head, shielded Emily as best he could, and pressed forward into the gale. The world shrank to 3 points, the weight of the child in his arms, the dark form of the shepherd leading him forward, and the burning need to get them all out alive. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Daniel lost track of time, lost track of everything but the rhythm: Shadow's bark, Emily's faint breaths, his own pounding heart. He told himself every step was one less between them and safety. Finally, Shadow stopped again, barking louder this time, voice slicing the storm with urgency. Daniel stumbled forward, nearly collapsing as he followed. Through the swirling snow, something emerged, dark shapes, blurred but solid. The outline of rooftops, a chimney jutting stubbornly into the storm. Civilization. Shelter. Hope lit Daniel's chest like fire. Almost there, he whispered into Emily's hair. Just a little longer. Shadow barked again, not with desperation this time, but triumph. They had found the edge of town. The storm hadn't beaten them yet. The roofs were there, dark shapes against the blizzard, half buried in snow, ghostly like ships sinking in an ocean of white. But between Daniel and those rooftops was 100 yards of open ground, scoured by wind and whipped by snow so thick it felt alive. He tightened his grip on Emily. Her body sagged heavier against him now, her breath shallow puffs of vapor that barely reached the air. "Stay with me, Emily," he said, voice low but firm. "We're almost safe. Almost home." Her lashes fluttered but didn't open. Shadow barked once, circling back toward them, his body pressing against Daniel's knee as if to say, "Move, don't stop." The shepherd's fur was crusted with ice, his breath steaming like smoke, but his eyes burned with purpose. Daniel took a step forward, and nearly went down. The snow here wasn't just drift, it was packed over ice. His boots slid, his balance teetered. He adjusted quickly, shifting Emily higher in his arms, but his thighs screamed from the effort. Carrying her was like hauling a sandbag soaked in ice water, every ounce pressing harder as fatigue gnawed at him. He forced himself forward, step by step. His training kicked in, the voice drilled into him from years of service, one step at a time, soldier. Small victories. One more step means you're still alive. The wind shrieked, carrying phantom voices. At times, Daniel swore he could hear Mira calling her daughter's name. At others, it was just the scream of the storm, mocking him. He pressed his forehead against Emily's damp hair, grounding himself in the warmth of her existence. She wasn't gone. Not yet. Shadow forged ahead, weaving in and out of the storm like a phantom himself. Twice, Daniel lost sight of him entirely, panic clawing his chest, until a bark cut through the storm and the shepherd reappeared, tail high, ears slicing the gale. Daniel locked onto him like a lifeline. At 50 yards, his legs began to fail. The blizzard pressed back with all its weight, as though it knew how close they were and refused to surrender. Daniel dropped to one knee, teeth clenched, Emily still clutched tight. Snow instantly tried to bury them, hissing around his body. Shadow whipped back, barking furiously, running circles around them, his voice breaking through the white noise like gunfire. He pressed against Daniel, pawing at his leg, eyes blazing, up. Now. Daniel shut his eyes and summoned every ounce of will. He'd carried wounded men out of kill zones, bled through firefights, faced nights darker than this one. He hadn't let death win then, and he wouldn't let it now. With a guttural shout, he pushed himself upright again. Step by step, they clawed toward the nearest house, a squat structure, half submerged in drifts, its windows frosted solid. Shadow bounded ahead, then leapt at the door, barking wildly. The sound echoed faintly inside. Someone was there. Daniel staggered to the porch, his boots crunching against ice-coated wood. He pounded the door with his fist. "Open up! Rescue team!" His voice cracked, swallowed by the wind, but inside he heard movement, shuffling, a gasp, then the scrape of a lock. The door cracked open, yellow light spilling into the white hell. A man's face appeared, pale and wide-eyed. "God Almighty, get in, quick!" Daniel shoved through, half carrying, half collapsing with Emily into the warmth. Shadow barreled in behind, shaking snow across the wooden floor. The door slammed shut, muting the blizzard to a muffled roar outside. Heat. Light. Life. Daniel collapsed to his knees, Emily still wrapped tight in his arms, his body trembling with exhaustion. The man stared in shock. "Is she?" "She's alive," Daniel said, his voice a rasp. He peeled back his coat, revealing Emily's blue lips, the faint rise and fall of her chest. "But not for long if we don't get her warm." The stranger didn't hesitate. He grabbed blankets from a chest near the stove, shoving them toward Daniel, who stripped off his outer parka and wrapped Emily tight. Shadow lay pressed against her side, his body heat radiating into her. The shepherd's head rested gently on her chest, ears twitching at every breath she took. For the first time in hours, Daniel allowed himself to breathe. They had shelter. For now, Emily was still alive. But the storm outside roared on, relentless. And Daniel knew the fight wasn't over yet. The door thudded shut behind them, and for a moment, the silence was deafening. No more shrieking wind. No more stabbing snow. Just the crackle of a wood stove and the sound of 3 hearts pounding in rhythm, Daniel's, Emily's faint flutter, and Shadow's steady thrum. The stranger, a gaunt man with frost in his beard and fear still etched into his eyes, stumbled back as Daniel laid Emily gently on a rug before the stove. Shadow immediately circled and settled beside her, his body curving protectively around her small frame, the heat from his body fusing with the fire's warmth. "She was out there?" the man asked, voice hoarse with disbelief. Daniel peeled off his gloves, flexing fingers that burned as sensation returned. "Buried in a drift. Minutes from freezing solid." Shadow found her. He stripped Emily's soaked outer layers, replacing them with blankets the man shoved into his hands. Her lips were still a frightening shade of blue, but the rise and fall of her chest was steadier now. The man crouched, eyes wide. "You're lucky you made it. This storm, it's not like anything I've seen. Whole roads gone, even barns collapsing under ice. Thought the town would lose her for sure." Daniel didn't look up. His focus was on Emily, tucking blankets, rubbing her arms to coax circulation, pressing her small hands against his chest so she could feel the rhythm of a beating heart. "She's tougher than she looks. But we can't stay here forever. The firehouse has medics. She needs more than warmth, she needs care." The man hesitated, glancing at the frosted windows. The storm beat against them like fists, rattling panes, howling through unseen cracks. "You'll never make it. Not with her. Not tonight." Shadow lifted his head at that, eyes glowing amber in the firelight, ears pricked. He gave a low growl, not at the man, but at the suggestion of stopping. His gaze fixed on Daniel, waiting. Daniel pressed his palm to the shepherd's flank, steadying himself as much as the dog. "We'll make it," he said firmly. "We didn't come this far to stop short." Myra's voice echoed in his head. She wouldn't last the night out there. She'd been right, but she hadn't counted on Shadow's nose, or Daniel's refusal to surrender. And he wasn't about to surrender now. Emily stirred then, a weak whimper slipping from her throat. Her eyes fluttered, lashes crusted with frost, and she whispered a single word, "Cold." Daniel's throat tightened. He leaned low, brushing her forehead with his lips, his breath warming her skin. "I know, sweetheart. You hold on. Shadow and I, we've got you. We'll get you home." Shadow nosed her cheek gently, a soft rumble in his chest like a lullaby. Emily's tiny hand shifted, fingers curling into the thick fur of his ruff. For the first time since they'd found her, her trembling eased. Daniel sat back on his heels, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. His thighs screamed, his shoulders burned, but his mind was still locked in soldier's focus: map the path, calculate the risks, plan the next move. He couldn't let himself think about how close death had been, how fragile this rescue was. One mistake, one moment of weakness, and the storm would claim her. The stranger placed a kettle on the stove, steam beginning to hiss. "At least wait an hour. Let her warm. Let the storm ease." Daniel looked to the window, where snow battered the glass in furious sheets. It didn't look like it would ease, not tonight, maybe not until dawn. His jaw tightened. An hour. No more. He adjusted Emily's blanket one last time, then leaned back against the wall, Shadow pressed against his leg. The shepherd's eyes never left the girl. Even when his body sagged with fatigue, he refused to close them. He would not rest until she was safe. And Daniel knew, deep in his bones, that the dog was right. Rest was a luxury. Survival was the only mission left. The hour passed slower than any Daniel could remember. He sat on the wooden floor of the cabin, back pressed against the wall, every muscle taut as if bracing for another fight. His eyes never strayed far from Emily. She lay bundled in blankets, her breath shallow but steady, her cheeks no longer deathly pale but flushed faintly pink from the fire. Each rise and fall of her chest felt like a victory. Shadow hadn't moved. The shepherd lay curled against her, head resting on her shoulder, his own chest rising in rhythm with hers. Every time she shivered, his body tensed, leaning closer, as though he could will warmth into her through sheer willpower. Daniel knew the truth. More than the fire, more than the blankets, it was Shadow's body heat and refusal to leave her side that had kept the girl tethered to life. The stranger hovered near the stove, pacing occasionally to the frosted window. His name was Harold, he'd said, though Daniel barely remembered it. Harold's nerves showed in his restless hands, his constant muttering. "The storm's getting worse," he said at least 3 times. "Roof's collapsing, I heard it out there. Whole barn's groaning under the weight." Daniel answered each time the same, "We move at first light." But light felt like a lie. Outside, the blizzard was endless. The window panes rattled under the fists of the wind, snow seeping in at the edges in thin, hissing trails. It was as if the storm knew there was life inside this cabin and was determined to crush it. Emily stirred once, her small hands slipping free of the blankets. Her fingers found Shadow's ear, curling into it. Daniel leaned forward, voice low. "You hold on, Emily. We're not done yet." The dog shifted only to nudge her hand back under the covers. Then he settled again, eyes open, never closing. Daniel envied him that stubborn endurance. When the hour passed, Daniel stood, shoulders heavy but mind sharpened by decision. He rechecked the straps on his pack, tightened his boots, and layered his gloves. "Time's up," he said simply. Harold spun from the window, disbelief written in his frost-chapped face. "You'll kill her dragging her out there. She needs days, not hours." Daniel's gaze was steel. "She doesn't have days. She might not have another night. Medics have equipment, heat, IVs. Out here, she has fire and luck. Luck runs out." Shadow rose instantly, tail stiff, ears perked as if he'd been waiting for that command. Emily whimpered at the shift in warmth, but Daniel was already kneeling beside her, wrapping her tighter, preparing to carry her again. Her eyes cracked open, glazed but faintly aware. "Where?" she murmured. "Home," Daniel said firmly. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, then lifted her against his chest, tucking her head under his chin. She felt lighter now, but Daniel knew it was the dangerous kind of lightness, hollow, weak, the body conserving what little it had left. Harold blocked the door for a moment, shaking his head. "If you go out there, you'll all be snow statues by morning." Daniel's voice was flat, the tone of a man who'd marched through worse odds. "Then we'll be statues closer to the firehouse. Move." Reluctantly, Harold pulled the latch. The door groaned open, and the storm screamed in like an enemy let through the gate. Snow surged, biting, slashing. Daniel tightened his grip on Emily and stepped forward without hesitation. Shadow plunged into the white first, barking against the gale, his body cutting a path. His bark wasn't frantic now, it was commanding, leading, demanding Daniel follow. The door slammed shut behind them. The warmth of the cabin vanished, swallowed by a world of white. Only 3 figures moved into the storm, the soldier carrying the child, the shepherd forging ahead, and the blizzard, eager to test how far desperation could walk before breaking. Daniel lowered his head, teeth grit, voice barely audible above the roar. "Lead on, Shadow. Let's finish this." The cabin's glow was gone in seconds, swallowed by the storm until Daniel could almost believe they'd imagined it. Out here there was no up or down, no horizon, no road. Just white upon white, a living wall that screamed and whispered at once. It was like walking inside a nightmare, one that didn't end when you opened your eyes, because your eyes couldn't see further than a few feet. Emily was a fragile weight in his arms, too light for a living child, and that frightened Daniel more than the storm itself. Her small breaths fogged against his parka, faint and shallow. Every few steps, he shifted her closer against his chest, trying to pour his own heat into her body. He spoke into her hair, steady, rhythmic words meant to tether her consciousness. "You're going home. You're safe with us. Shadows leading. Just breathe, Emily. Keep breathing." Sometimes she made a soft sound in answer. Sometimes nothing at all. Daniel refused to panic. He counted her breaths instead, 10, 20, 30, forcing himself to believe that each one was proof they were winning. Shadow cut ahead, a dark streak in the blizzard. His bark came sharp, measured, a signal for Daniel to keep his course. The shepherd stopped often, paws digging, nose buried in snow. He was searching, mapping the invisible, fence posts, collapsed sheds, scent trails the storm hadn't erased. Once, Shadow growled low, his body bristling. Daniel's stomach clenched, until he saw it, a power line, half buried, its cable sparking faint blue where it touched the snow. If Daniel had gone blind into it, Emily's story would have ended here. Shadow led them wide, barking until Daniel veered clear. The soldier whispered a hoarse, "Good boy." The dog didn't need praise, but Daniel needed to say it. Needed the reminder that they weren't wandering blindly, that every step had purpose. The ground dipped without warning, and Daniel nearly went down, sliding knee-deep into a hidden ditch. Emily whimpered as the jolt shook her, her head lolling. He tightened his arms, heart hammering. "I've got you," he growled, hauling them both back onto steady snow. His thighs burned with the effort, sweat freezing on his back. But stopping wasn't an option. Through the howl, he began to hear other sounds, phantoms, maybe, but enough to make his chest tighten. Was it wind whistling through gaps in barns? Or voices? He couldn't tell. The storm played tricks, twisting echoes into cruel imitations of hope. Shadow barked again, this time sharp, insistent. He was pawing furiously at something ahead. Daniel staggered forward and saw it, a wooden signpost, nearly encased in ice, the top just visible above the drift. He brushed the frost with his glove, squinting at the faint letters, "Main Road." A surge of adrenaline cut through his exhaustion. The firehouse wasn't far now, he could picture it in his mind, perched on the rise overlooking the drowned town. If they'd hit the road, they had a chance. Emily stirred weakly, murmuring one word, broken and muffled, "Cold." Daniel pressed his lips to her forehead. "I know. Just a little longer. You're almost there." But the storm wasn't finished. The wind howled louder, whipping snow in sheets that blinded him. His flashlight was useless, swallowed whole. Even Shadow blurred, vanishing and reappearing like a phantom ahead. Daniel bent low, head down, every step an act of war against the white. His legs shook, his lungs burned, but his grip never loosened. He could fall. He could break. But he would not drop her. Shadow's bark pierced the storm again, closer now, more urgent. Daniel followed the sound, stumbled, then saw it, the faint glow of red through the white. A beacon light. Faint, blurred, but real. His chest surged with a hope so fierce it almost hurt. He kissed Emily's hair, his voice breaking. "See that, sweetheart? That's home. Just hold on." Shadow barked again, louder this time, tail high, ears forward, driving them the last stretch of the maze. The firehouse was near. Survival was close enough to taste, if the storm didn't take its last shot. The beacon was there, faint, blurry through the curtain of snow, but Daniel knew how deceptive distance could be in a storm like this. What looked like 100 yards could stretch into 500 when the ground swallowed your steps. Still, it was hope, and hope was enough to keep his legs moving. Emily lay limp against his chest, her face pressed into his jacket, her small breaths brushing like whispers against his skin. Too faint, too shallow. He adjusted his grip, tightening the blanket around her, as if he could keep the storm from clawing the life out of her. "Almost there, Emily," he said, voice low and steady. "Shadow's taking us home." The shepherd's bark cut through the gale, closer now, sharp and commanding. He trotted just ahead, tail stiff, body braced against the wind. Every few steps, he looked back, eyes glowing with reflection in Daniel's flashlight beam, checking, urging, leading. The road beneath them was uneven, broken by drifts that swallowed Daniel to the thigh. His muscles screamed with each lift, his lungs burned raw, but he never loosened his hold. Every ounce of his strength went into one mission: carry the child forward, follow the dog, ignore everything else. A gust slammed into him sideways, nearly knocking him down. Snow whipped his face, his vision blinding. His knee buckled, and for a split second, the world tilted. Shadow barked frantically, circling back, shoving against Daniel's leg with his shoulder. The dog's body was a brace, a wall of muscle and loyalty. Daniel straightened, gritted his teeth, and pushed on. The storm wasn't just weather now, it felt personal, like an enemy determined to drag them under. But Daniel had fought enemies before. He whispered through clenched teeth, "Not today." Emily stirred, her lips moving faintly. He bent his head, catching the whisper. "Shadow." Daniel's throat tightened. Even half-conscious, she knew who held her tethered to life. He pressed his cheek against her hair, whispering, "He's here. He won't leave you." Shadow barked again, but this time the bark was different, excited, urgent. Daniel lifted his head, squinting through the white. The beacon was clearer now, the glow steady, pulsing against the storm. And beyond it, shapes. Dark, hulking shapes that moved. People. Rescue crews. Adrenaline surged through him. He shouted, though the storm shredded his voice. "Over here! We've got her!" The shapes turned. Flashlights cut through the blizzard, beams dancing. Voices carried back, faint but real. "This way! Keep shouting!" Daniel roared again, lungs burning. "Child alive! This way!" Shadow bounded ahead, barking furiously, drawing the rescuers toward them like a flare in the storm. Daniel stumbled forward, every muscle screaming, but his chest felt light with the surge of hope. They had made it this far. They could make the last few yards. A rescuer in a red parka broke through the white first, his face masked by goggles and frost. He shouted over the wind, "We see you! Don't stop!" Daniel staggered into the light of their torches, his knees nearly giving. Strong hands reached for Emily, but Daniel held her tighter a moment, his voice rough. "She's breathing. Keep her warm. Don't let her slip." The rescuer nodded firmly. "We've got her. You did it." Shadow pressed against Daniel's leg, his chest heaving, muzzle caked in ice. The shepherd didn't celebrate, didn't relax. He stayed rigid, eyes on Emily as the medic wrapped her in thicker blankets, pressing an oxygen mask gently to her face. Daniel finally let her go, his arms trembling with emptiness when the weight left them. He dropped to his knees in the snow, chest heaving, watching as color began to creep faintly back into her cheeks. The blizzard still howled, furious, but inside Daniel's chest, a different storm had broken. Relief. They weren't out of danger yet, but they had reached hands that could carry the fight. And that meant survival was finally possible. The rescuers swarmed with practiced urgency, voices cutting through the storm in short, clipped commands. "Blankets here. Oxygen ready. Get the sled. Their flashlights stabbed through the white, halos of light spinning across the snow as they closed in on Daniel and Emily. Daniel sank to one knee, chest heaving, his arms still wrapped tight around the girl. Even as the nearest medic reached for her, he hesitated. Hours of carrying her through death's teeth had burned a simple truth into his bones. Letting her go felt impossible. "She's breathing," he rasped. His voice cracked from the cold and exhaustion. "But she's weak. Keep her warm. She can't lose heat again." The medic, a broad-shouldered woman with frost lining her goggles, crouched eye level with him. "You did good, soldier. Let us do the rest." Her hands were steady, practiced, but her tone carried respect. Not a demand, but an acknowledgement. Daniel's arms finally loosened. Emily's tiny frame was lifted from him, her body disappearing into a cocoon of thermal blankets and heating packs. A medic pressed an oxygen mask over her face, condensation fogging instantly as her breath stirred. It was faint, but it was there. Life, fragile but real. Myra's face burned in Daniel's mind. The promise he'd made, "I'll bring her back." He could almost hear her voice, could almost see her waiting at the firehouse. That image had been the fuel for every step through the storm. Now it surged in his chest again, and his throat tightened. "She's alive, Myra. She's coming home." Shadow pressed into his side, body rigid, ears pinned. His amber eyes never left Emily, even as she was loaded gently onto a rescue sled. Snow clung to his fur, his chest rose and fell in hard bursts, but he didn't relax. His duty wasn't done until she was truly safe. One of the rescuers bent toward Daniel. "You need medical too." "Frostbite, exhaustion." Daniel shook his head sharply. "Later. She goes first." The man nodded, clapped his shoulder. "You carried her through this. You've earned the right to call the shots." The sled shifted forward, pulled by two men on skis, ropes taut. Emily's form, bundled and blanketed, was barely visible under the layers, but her small hand slipped free just long enough to brush against Shadow's ear as he walked beside her. The shepherd leaned close, almost nudging her hand back inside, and his low rumble cut through the storm. The rescuers noticed. One muttered, "Dog won't leave her, huh?" Daniel, staggering upright, managed a tired smile. "He never does." They began the trek back, the sled carving a narrow trail through the drifts. Daniel trudged beside it, every step a battle against collapsing legs. But he refused to lag behind. Shadow matched pace with the sled, close enough that the rope handlers had to adjust their steps, but no one shoved him back. Even in this chaos, they seemed to understand, this wasn't just a dog. This was her guardian, her shadow in every sense. The storm raged, unrelenting. Snow lashed faces, the wind screamed, but the group moved in a rhythm that felt unbreakable now. Each bark from Shadow cut through like a war cry, a declaration to the storm, "You didn't win. She's still breathing." Daniel's vision blurred with exhaustion, but the sight of the beacon growing brighter anchored him. The firehouse loomed at last, solid, defiant against the storm. Floodlights spilled gold across the hill, generators humming, rescuers in bright gear moving like ants. It looked like salvation. As they climbed the final rise, Daniel's legs buckled, and he fell to his knees in the snow. A rescuer caught his arm, hauling him up, but Daniel shook free. His gaze was locked on Emily, on her chest rising and falling beneath the mask. That was all that mattered. Shadow paused, turned back, and nudged Daniel's knee with his muzzle, urging him upright again. With a groan, Daniel forced himself to his feet. They weren't done yet. Not until Emily was inside those walls, under true care, safe. And together, they pushed the last few steps into the light. The firehouse doors slammed shut behind them, sealing out the storm with a muffled thud. For a moment, Daniel's world was disorienting, warmth, floodlights, the buzz of generators, people shouting orders that echoed against concrete walls. After hours of nothing but white and silence, it was like stepping into another planet. Medics swarmed the sled immediately, lifting Emily with practiced hands onto a cot near a portable heater. The blankets were peeled back, heating pads pressed against her small chest and under her arms. The oxygen mask stayed tight on her face, mist blooming against the plastic with each fragile breath. Daniel stood just feet away, but he felt rooted to the floor, boots soaked, body trembling. His arms still ached from carrying her, and now, without her weight anchoring him, he felt hollow, unfinished. Shadow didn't hesitate. The shepherd leapt onto the cot platform with the agility of a soldier scaling a wall. He pressed himself against Emily's side, ignoring the medic's shouts at first. His chest pressed to hers, his head resting across her ribs. He was measuring her life the way only he could, breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat. One medic moved to push him back, but Daniel stepped forward sharply, his voice hoarse but firm. Let him stay. He found her. He kept her alive out there. You want her steady, he stays. The medic hesitated, eyes meeting Daniel's, then nodded once. Fine. As long as he doesn't interfere. Shadow didn't interfere. He didn't move at all, except to twitch an ear whenever Emily stirred, or to let out a low rumble when a stranger's hand came too close without Daniel's approval. His eyes, dark and unblinking, never left the girl's face. Daniel sank onto a sandbag near the cot, elbows on his knees, head bowed. The adrenaline was gone now, leaving only bone-deep exhaustion. His skin burned where frostbite threatened, his lungs felt carved raw by the cold air, but none of it mattered. Every ounce of his focus was locked on Emily's chest, watching it rise, waiting for the next fall, terrified of the silence between. Minutes stretched into an eternity. A medic called numbers, pulse weak but steady. Temperature rising, she's stabilizing. Another muttered, she's tough, this one. Most kids wouldn't have lasted an hour out there. Daniel barely heard them. Myra's face filled his mind, her desperation at the firehouse door, her last words, if anyone can find her, it's you and Shadow. He had clung to those words like a lifeline, and now, watching Emily cling stubbornly to life, he realized they hadn't been hope, they had been prophecy. Emily stirred then, a faint whimper escaping her lips. Her hand twitched, slipping free of the blanket, fingers curling weakly into Shadow's fur. The shepherd lowered his head further, his muzzle brushing her hand, and for the first time since they'd pulled her from the snow, Daniel saw her lips move. A whisper, broken and faint, but clear enough to make his chest ache. Shadow. Mira wasn't here to hear it. But Daniel was. And he knew those words were proof Emily was still in the fight. Shadow's tail thumped once against the cot, soft, restrained, as though even celebration needed to be measured against her fragile state. His eyes softened, and he exhaled a deep sigh that seemed to settle the whole firehouse. Daniel rubbed his hands over his face, fighting the sting in his eyes. Relief was dangerous, it could unmake you after holding strong too long. But watching Emily's hand tangled in Shadow's fur, her breath steadier under the mask, he let himself feel it. Just for a moment. Around them, the storm still battered the walls, rattling doors and windows like a relentless enemy. But here, in this circle of warmth and vigilance, Daniel knew they had won the night's battle. The war for survival wasn't over, but they had carved out a fragile victory. And they had done it together, soldier, child, and dog. When dawn finally broke, it came not with brightness but with a bruised kind of light, the sky streaked in muted purples and pale gold. Snow still fell, but gentler now, flakes drifting like ash after a great fire. The blizzard's fury had passed, leaving behind silence so heavy it felt sacred. Inside the firehouse, the silence was different. Generators hummed, medics moved softly, voices muted as if they too knew they stood in the aftermath of something greater than weather. Rows of cots stretched across the hall, families huddled together under blankets, children whispering against their mother's shoulders. But at the far end, near the heater's steady glow, 3 figures held the quiet in their own way: a soldier, a child, and a dog. Emily stirred first, her eyes fluttering open, lids heavy but no longer frozen with exhaustion. She blinked, gaze wandering, before it landed on the shepherd pressed against her side. Shadow hadn't moved all night. His muzzle still rested near her hand, his chest rising with the rhythm of her own. As her fingers curled deeper into his fur, his ears twitched, and he opened his eyes. "Shadow," she whispered, her voice hoarse but alive. The dog's tail swept the cot once, twice, a sound softer than any applause. Daniel lifted his head from his seat on the sandbag, eyes red-rimmed from fatigue but alert the moment he heard her voice. He leaned forward, his body aching, but his heart surging with relief. "Welcome back, kiddo," he murmured. Emily's lips curved faintly, though the oxygen mask muffled her expression. Her gaze drifted, searching, as though expecting something more. And then came the moment Daniel had been carrying in his chest since the night before. The firehouse doors opened, and Mira burst through. Her face was pale from the cold, her eyes wild until they found the cot. The cry that tore from her throat was raw, unrestrained, the kind of sound only a mother can make when fear is shattered by hope. She rushed forward, falling to her knees beside the cot, hands trembling as they cupped Emily's face. "My baby," she sobbed, pressing kisses to her forehead, cheeks, hair. "Oh, thank God, my baby." Emily reached for her weakly, her small arms wrapping around her mother's neck with surprising strength. Shadow shifted only slightly, making space but refusing to move away entirely. His head remained near Emily's side, his eyes soft but still vigilant. Myra's tear-filled gaze lifted to Daniel. Words failed her at first, her lips trembling, her breath catching. When she finally spoke, it was broken but fierce. You brought her back. You and him. You saved her." Daniel shook his head, voice rough. "Shadow found her. Shadow never left her." Mira reached out with one hand, touching the shepherd's ear. "Then God bless you, boy. You're her angel." Shadow blinked, leaning into her touch, before nudging his head back toward Emily, as if to say, "My duty's not done yet." The storm outside was still digging its claws into the world, but inside, warmth grew with every passing minute. Emily's cheeks flushed a healthier pink, her breath steadier under the mask. Mira held her close, rocking gently, whispering promises Daniel couldn't quite hear but knew by heart. "You're safe now. I've got you. I'll never let go." Daniel leaned back against the wall, his body finally allowing a sliver of rest. He watched them, mother, daughter, dog, and let out a long breath that carried all the weight of the night. For the first time since stepping into that storm, he felt the tension uncoil from his chest. The blizzard had tried to bury them, to erase the child, to drown hope in white silence. But Shadow had refused. He had barked, dug, guarded, and refused to leave. And because of that, Emily had survived. As the first true sunlight broke through the high windows, painting the firehouse floor in gold, Daniel let his eyes close, not in defeat, but in peace. Beside him, Shadow finally rested too, his head on his paws, his duty complete for now. The storm had passed. The girl was alive. And the shepherd who never left her side had proven, once again, that loyalty could outlast even the fiercest blizzard.